You've heard something in the silence, haven't you? A whisper when no one was around. A sudden peace while your mind was racing. A knowing that wasn't yours. That wasn't your imagination. It was guidance. And if you ignore it, you'll keep mistaking divine direction for random noise. This moment right now could open your ears forever. There's a sound beyond logic, and it doesn't compete for attention, it commands it. While your thoughts shout from fear, God's voice whispers from certainty. Your thoughts rehearse the past, argue the present, and dread the future. But the voice of God settles time itself. It speaks with the weight of truth, not the pressure of emotion. That voice doesn't rush. It waits. It doesn't beg you to listen. It knows its authority. And once you've heard it, no counterfeit ever sounds right again. Your thoughts are built on what you've seen, what you've suffered, what you fear. They loop and loop like a broken record until you're exhausted. But God's voice interrupts. It speaks in full stops. It ends confusion and brings you to clarity in one breath. It doesn't flatter your ego. It stretches your spirit. It doesn't sound like your comfort zone. It sounds like your calling. Every thought you have is filtered through your experience. But the voice of God cuts through what you think you know. It challenges your logic, yet feels like peace. You'll recognize it when it doesn't align with your fears, but calls you beyond them. When it contradicts what you want, yet gives you what you need. When it says go and your excuses start trembling. When it says wait and your anxiety melts without explanation. The thoughts in your head seek to keep you safe. But the voice of God, it seeks to make you whole. Your thoughts bargain with truth. His voice is truth. Your thoughts are shaped by trauma, culture, upbringing, and doubt. But his voice pierces through every false identity you worn just to survive and calls you back to who you were always meant to be. Your mind will often give you options. God's voice gives you conviction. Your thoughts are full of conditions, but his voice speaks with certainty. You are chosen. You are more. You were born for this. And somehow, even if you don't understand the words yet, your soul says yes before your mind catches up. You don't need to strain to hear it. The problem isn't the volume, it's the clutter. Silence isn't empty. It's where the voice becomes loud. In the stillness, you'll find the difference. Thoughts are reactive. God's voice is proactive. Thoughts confuse. His voice clarifies. Thoughts complicate. His voice simplifies. And here's the test. When you hear something inside you and it leads you to love deeper, serve higher, forgive quicker, act braver, that's not your thoughts. That's the divine frequency. Tune into that. It won't feel like self-preservation. It'll feel like purpose. Your thoughts are not evil. They're just limited. They think in pieces. But God's voice sees the whole. When you surrender your logic to that voice, life becomes an orchestra instead of noise. Your steps become guided. Your delays make sense. Your detours become divine strategies. And suddenly, you're not surviving life, you're living out destiny. So if you've been wondering which voice to trust, ask yourself this: which one leads you out of fear and into power? Which one challenges your comfort but reveals your calling? Which one feels like peace in the middle of chaos? That's the one that's never wrong. You don't need to chase it. Just clear the space for it. It was always there. And when you hear it, really hear it, your life will never echo the same again. You'll notice something quiet. When it's truly divine, it doesn't panic. It doesn't rush to prove a point or force its presence. It enters your soul like a calm wave, not like a crashing storm. Your thoughts, however, are often born from urgency. They race, they scramble, they pressure you into decisions. God's voice doesn't need to be loud because it's always right. Where your thoughts create anxiety, that deeper voice silences it. There's no rush in truth, it simply is. When you feel pressure, pause. Ask where it's coming from. Real guidance doesn't demand, it directs. It doesn't panic, it positions. When your thoughts push you, it's fear in disguise. When something leads you gently but firmly. That's where wisdom lives. The urgency you feel isn't always a sign. It's often a distraction. God's voice brings a knowing, not a guessing. It feels like time stops when it speaks, because eternity doesn't shout, it whispers. Your mind is a mirror, reflecting everything it's ever seen, felt, or feared. It runs on patterns built by experience, most of which are incomplete. It remembers what hurt you, what scared you, what made you hesitate. But the voice of God isn't drawn from your past, it's drawn from your purpose. It doesn't speak based on wounds, but on calling. It shows you a version of yourself your thoughts have never met. Your mind recycles pain, but God reveals the promise. That voice will point where you've never been, but somehow feel meant to be. It knows what's ahead and prepares you without panic. While your thoughts are stuck in circles, this voice calls you forward in straight lines. It won't speak in fear, it will speak in vision. It's not rooted in what has happened, but what's possible. Don't let the past in your head drown out the future in your heart. Destiny doesn't repeat, it creates. Condemnation makes you feel trapped. It says, you'll never be more than this. It floods you with guilt, shame, and doubt. But conviction is a lifeline. It lifts, it redirects, it purifies. God's voice convicts with clarity, not cruelty. It doesn't attack your worth, it awakens your potential. Where thoughts push you deeper into regret, divine correction pulls you into realignment. It doesn't leave you drowning, it throws a rope. Conviction might sting, but it heals. It doesn't punish, it transforms. Thoughts replay failure until you believe you are your worst moment. But the voice of God reminds you, you are more than what you've done. It speaks from mercy, not memory. It shows you the way forward, not the chains behind. One leads to bondage, the other to breakthrough. The difference, one leaves you in the dark, the other turns on the light. There's a sound that cuts through the chaos of your thoughts and delivers simplicity. Your mind, when left unchecked, becomes a maze. One question leads to 10 more, and you end up lost in your own reasoning. But when God speaks, it all clicks. It becomes clear. You don't need 100 explanations, you just know. His voice doesn't explain everything. It just makes it unnecessary to worry. Your thoughts overthink, his voice overcomes. Your mind wants details. His voice gives direction. Simplicity is a sign of divine wisdom, doesn't need decoration. It brings stillness where there was tension. It brings a yes in your spirit without arguing the how. When things suddenly feel light after feeling heavy, that's the divine removing confusion. What's true will always carry ease, not because it's easy, but because it's real. And what's real doesn't need to be complicated. It just needs to be followed. The mind looks for safety, comfort, familiarity. It builds fences to protect you from pain. But God's voice calls you to break those fences and walk into wild faith. While thoughts say stay, his whisper says go. It's rarely comfortable, but always correct. Your comfort zone may feel like peace, but it's actually a cage. Real peace isn't found in what's easy. It's found in what's right. The divine voice stretches you. It makes you grow. It sends you where your feet are afraid to go, but your spirit has already arrived. Your thoughts play defense. His voice plays offense. It leads, even if your logic protests. Sometimes what feels dangerous to your ego is safe for your soul. You weren't created to stay small. That voice knows it. And it won't let you settle for survival when you were made for significance. Noise is everywhere, screens, opinions, expectations. But silence is where you meet the eternal. When you slow down, your spirit speeds up. Thoughts scream for attention. But God speaks in stillness. If you can't hear him, try listening differently. Try quiet. Try solitude. His voice is not absent, it's just uninvited in your chaos. It won't compete with the noise, it'll wait. And when you finally listen, you'll hear it like thunder inside a whisper. You'll realize he was always speaking, you were just too full to receive. In the silence, peace grows louder than pain. You begin to separate what's loud from what's true. You don't need more noise, you need more discernment. Real direction comes in the quiet. Stillness isn't nothing. It's everything you've been too distracted to hear. The mind asks 1,000 anxious questions. What if it fails? What if I'm not enough? What if I get hurt again? It builds scenarios that steal your peace. But God's voice says, I am. That's it. No explanation, no apology, just pure assurance. Your thoughts may question your identity, but his voice secures it. Where the mind says, what if I can't? He answers, I already did. That voice doesn't give you probabilities. It gives you presence. It brings you back to now, to truth, to solid ground. While the mind speculates, the voice of God establishes. While your thoughts spin in chaos, that voice stands unshaken. You don't need answers, you need alignment. And when you're aligned, fear loses its grip. Certainty isn't built on outcomes. It's built on identity. And when God speaks, he always reminds you who you are. Sometimes you feel peace before you see proof. That's the sign you're not listening to your own understanding. Thoughts want confirmation, evidence, and control. But the voice of God gives none of that, and it still brings peace. It doesn't wait for results to calm you. It is the calm. That inner knowing, that quiet strength is realer than facts. Trust doesn't begin with sight, it begins with surrender. When you walk with God, peace is the compass, not the consequence. Even when your world shakes, that voice stays steady. Your thoughts may scream, what if? But the peace says it's already done. You feel safe, not because circumstances change, but because you're no longer alone in them. This kind of peace can't be explained. It just is. And once you feel it, you'll stop chasing answers and start following the presence. Reactions are knee-jerk, emotional, instant. Your thoughts often react without processing. They mimic patterns of pain. But God's voice doesn't react, it responds. It sees the whole picture and speaks from wholeness. It doesn't lash out, it leads. While your thoughts scream now, the divine voice often says, wait. It teaches you to respond with purpose, not pressure. It doesn't speak just to speak. It speaks to heal. Where thoughts defend, God's voice delivers. One protects pride. The other protects purpose. There's power in restraint, in listening before speaking, in understanding before deciding. The voice of God won't feed your impulsive habits. It'll break them. It brings maturity, not just emotion. When your thoughts react in fear, God's voice responds in love. That difference saves you from battles you never had to fight. Your thoughts are shaped by criticism, comparison, and brokenness. They rarely speak kindly. They say you're too late, too flawed, too small. But when God speaks, it's different. It feels like home. It feels like truth you forgot you knew. It tells you you are loved, you are called, you are able. It doesn't remind you of your mistakes, it restores your image. It doesn't see who you've been, it sees who you were born to be. That voice doesn't flatter, it affirms. It doesn't shout, it settles. When you feel like giving up, that voice tells you not yet. There's more. It never calls you by your failure. It calls you by your future. It breaks shame with just one sentence. That's how you know it's not your thoughts, it's something divine, something pure, something worth listening to. Your thoughts are constantly on defense. They build walls, wear masks, create stories just to survive. They're trained by pain, conditioned by doubt. But God's voice, it's the force that walks right through the walls you built and says you're free. It doesn't need permission to enter. It doesn't negotiate with fear. It delivers you without explanation. While your thoughts protect what's broken, his voice exposes it so it can be healed. It's not interested in who you pretend to be. It speaks directly to who you are underneath it all. Defense mechanisms keep you trapped, but deliverance sets you loose from invisible chains. You were not born to live guarded, you were born to live whole. And the voice of God doesn't patch things, it transforms them. It says, enough hiding, come into the light, and in that light, fear these. Your thoughts may shield you, but only the voice of God can save you. You felt it before in the middle of chaos, a sudden stillness, no reason, no logic, just peace. While your world was shaking, something inside you stood still. That's not chance. That's not your mind. That's God. Because his voice doesn't wait for calm, it creates it. He speaks and storms obey, not always outside, but definitely within. The moment you hear him, the panic starts to fade. You begin to breathe again. You begin to trust again. Your thoughts may still swirl, but your soul rests. That's the mark of the divine. It doesn't remove every problem, but it makes you bigger than them. It builds an unshakable peace in the middle of shaking ground. It turns fear into faith, chaos into clarity. When the storm rages, listen not outside, but within. That's where he whispers, peace, be still. And suddenly everything shifts. The mind wants details. It wants charts, plans, guarantees. It asks 1,000 times why. But the voice of God bypasses all of that. It doesn't explain, it reveals. It speaks straight to your spirit in ways words can't. You just know. You just feel. You just recognize a truth deeper than intellect. It's not always what you want to hear, but it's always what you needed. It doesn't argue, it awakens. Your thoughts might wrestle with facts, but revelation comes like light through a crack. It floods everything. You stop needing the how because you finally heard the who. That voice makes things obvious that were once hidden. It shines through your confusion. You stop thinking your way through life and start walking with clarity. Real wisdom isn't always loudest light. And when the divine voice reveals something, your doubts don't stand a chance. Flattery is empty. It inflates your ego but starves your soul. The divine voice doesn't flatter, it refines. It speaks not to make you feel good, but to make you be good, better, stronger, truer. While your thoughts cling to image, God's voice digs for substance. It peels back layers you didn't know you had. It calls out the parts of you buried under fear and pride. It says, you're more than this. Let go. It might sting, but it heals. It might burn, but it purifies. You don't come out the same, you come out transformed. Your thoughts keep you comfortable. The voice of God makes you courageous. And in the process, you find your real power, not in pleasing others, but in becoming yourself. The version of you that was always waiting under the surface. Flattery will fade, but refinement will free you. There comes a moment when you stop wandering, when your feet start following a rhythm you didn't create, but deeply trust. That's alignment. That's what happens when you stop listening to every thought and start listening to the voice. Suddenly your steps make sense. The delays aren't random, they're preparation. The closed doors aren't rejection, they're redirection. You begin to walk with authority, not anxiety. You're not guessing anymore. You're guided. Every step carries weight, and yet it feels light. That's the beauty of divine alignment. Your mind wants to control, but your spirit wants to follow. And when you follow that voice, you find that your life isn't just happening, it's unfolding with precision. You're not lost, you're led. And being led by truth will take you places your thoughts could never map out. The moment you choose alignment over analysis, you enter destiny.